Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the ordinary meeting of the Wellington Shire Council on this Tuesday, 20th of August 2019. And members of the public gallery should note that the Council records and publishes Council's meetings via YouTube to enhance the accessibility of Council meetings to the broader Wellington community. These recordings are also archived and may be published on Council's website for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate time during the meeting, members of the gallery may address the Council, at which time their image, comments or submissions will be recorded. Members of the public who are not in attendance at the Council meeting but who wish to communicate with the Council via the webcasting chat room should lodge their questions or comments early in the meeting to ensure that their submissions can be dealt with at the end of the meeting. Please could gallery visitors and councillors ensure that the mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. If we could stand for the acknowledgement and prayer. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, the Gunai people, and pay respects to their elders past and present. Almighty God, we ask your blessing upon the Wellington Shire Council, its councillors, officers, staff and their families. We pray for your guidance in our decisions so that the true good of the Wellington Shire Council may result to the benefit of all residents and community groups. Amen. No apologies, CEO?
No, none, Mayor.
Councillors, any conflicts of interest? Moving on to item A4, confirmation of minutes of previous council meeting. Councillor Bai.
Thanks, Mayor. I move the Council adopt the minutes and resolutions of the ordinary council meeting of the 6th of August 2019.
A seconder for that motion. Councillor Marr. That motion is not opposed. The motion is carried. You need to speak to that, Councillor Bai. Moving on to item A5, business arising from previous meetings. Item A5, brackets 1, notice of motion planning scheme amendment C99. Councillor Marr.
I'd like to move the motion that item C3.2, Planning Scheme Amendment C99 from Council's 18th of June 2019 meeting be lifted off the table.
Seconded by Councillor Rossetti. Is it opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Marr.
I'd like to move that the following motion as an alternate motion, which will have the effect of deferring the Amendment C99. Number 1, that Council note the submission included in Attachment 1 sent to the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in response to the public exhibition of the draft Marine and Coastal Policy. 2, Council, prior to further considering Amendment C99, seek a comprehensive and definitive written response from the Minister for Energy, Environment and Climate Change and the Minister for Planning on steps to be taken to provide for a consistent state-led response to coastal flooding and coastal climate change adaptation with requisite community engagement, including in the Wellington Shire. And 3, Council, prior to further considering Amendment C99 and in lieu of the former Minister for Planning's decision to not apply flood controls to the urban area of Port Albert via Amendment C33, write to the current Minister for Planning to seek clarity and certainty of position in relation to proposed Amendment C99.
Seconder for that motion. Councillor McMillan. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Marr.
Currently, the state government has been seeking submission in response to its draft Marine and Coastal Policy. Wellington Shire's response can be found at Attachment A. It's a strongly worded response and certainly reflects the Shire's position. And I quote off this in the summary, action plans should ensure an unambiguous and consistent policy approach across Victoria, with the state government taking a key leadership role with local government, the community and other key coastal stakeholders. And that an inconsistent, fragmented approach to planning for sea level rise across the state may contribute to inequity, misinformation and social discord across Victorian communities. And I think that we need to be well aware that with regard to climate change, it's a class issue generally caused by the wealthy and affects the poor or a demographic in a community that cannot afford to mitigate. It's important that Council be part of the process currently being undertaken by DELP and await the final policy position due at the end of 2019 before moving forward with the C99 amendment. 10 years ago, the Port Albert community came together to fight the C33 amendment, which is very similar to the C99. Ironically, it was this experience that has landed me ultimately here at Council. And what we as a community learnt was that ambiguity from the state does create confusion, distress and anxiety amongst landowners, and that before adaptation is effective, community consultation and conversation is imperative. What was learnt was that strong leadership for adaptation is vital. Furthermore, it was the C33 amendment decision to not include flood controls within the township precinct of Port Albert that now creates further uncertainty and ambiguity for coastal communities. Presently in Port Albert, flood controls are managed in the building code to 2040 sea level flood extents and will continue to do so into the future for now. The fact that the Minister for Planning advised that we should include 2100 flood levels in the Wellington planning scheme, but not must, adds further ambiguity for local government. The Marine and Coastal Policy is an opportunity for state government to create a framework that mitigates adaptation and leadership. Local government and coastal communities need to tackle sea level rise and coastal inundation. However, misapplying planning interventions can also lead to suboptimal outcomes. And we want our coastal communities to remain viable and vibrant well into the future. Strong direction will allow this to happen.
Thanks, Councillor Marr. Councillor McCubbin?
May I say a few words?
Of course you may.
Look, I'd just like to congratulate Councillor Marr on bringing this item to the Council and to support her strong leadership in regard to the planning issue that's at place. Can I just stress a couple of things which I know Councillor Marr's already done, but that this emphasises that Council has an absolute role in climate change mitigation and absolutely believes that climate change mitigation is important for our coastal regions. That is absolute and clear, but it's clear also that this needs a consistent and appropriate response from state government, and that local government is above our pay grade, if you like, to consider the complex nature of the coastal communities, the trickiness of flood mitigation and indeed climate change adaptation. This is incredibly difficult. And as we discovered last time through the C33 amendment, when you don't bring the community along with you, then you create these sorts of conflicts. And that can be further exacerbated when state planning is different to local government planning. And again, I just would like to suggest that I think Councillor Marr's absolutely on the right track. It needs a strong response from state government. It needs us to be part of a process with our local community to have that discussion. And I certainly look forward to this. This is not saying that we don't believe climate change is important, because absolutely we do. We just think it's more important than a local government such as ourselves to be the number one responsible for it. We think the state government needs to take a strong line on this and to assist us in moving forward with that community. And I absolutely congratulate Councillor Marr for her strong words on this issue. Thank you. Well done.
Thanks, Councillor McCubbin. Given the importance of this issue, if anyone else would like to speak, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to firstly endorse the comments of Councillor Marr and thank her for her input, and also endorse the comments of Councillor McCubbin. The main reason I rise, Mr Mayor, is just to thank the CEO and the Council staff for the submission that's been made by Council to the draft coastal and marine policy, because I think it sort of sets out the fact that we need leadership, and this is sort of a theme. We need leadership from the state government on this matter. If you read the draft marine and coastal policy, if you read the state government's coastal adaptation policy or plan for 2017 to 2021, there's lots of big words that I don't understand in those documents, but they don't lead us to any firm direction or provide leadership on what is going to happen. And that is what I believe we need to ensure takes place for the benefit of our coastal communities. So thank you again, Mr CEO. Please pass on to the staff the thanks for that paper and submission to the marine and coastal policy. Thank you.
Given the importance of this issue, anyone else wish to speak to it? If not, could I just simply support the leadership taken in this issue by Councillor Marr, the support from Councillor McMillan in regard to that, the value of the contribution the officers have made in framing this response, and I think that we found the best way forward on a very difficult issue and suggested that responsibility be sheeted where it should go. So thank you very much. Moving on, any late items, CEO?
None, Mayor.
No notices of motion. Moving on to A8, receiving of petitions or joint letters. Item A81, outstanding petitions. Item A82, receipt of joint letter McMillan Street and Scott Street, Stratford. I think I've got Councillor Ripper.
Thank you, Mayor. Move that Council receive the attached joint letter penned by residents of McMillan Street and Scott Street, Stratford, in regard to a street upgrade through a special charge scheme, and 2, deal with the attached joint letter in relation to the street upgrade for McMillan and Scott Street, Stratford in this meeting, and 3, acknowledge that a response was sent to the correspondent of the letter acknowledging the request and confirming the commencement of the special charge scheme engagement process.
Seconded by Councillor Stevens. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Ripper, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. A letter has been sent out to the head proponent of this recommendation, and in due course the council manager with his staff will be in touch with the 9 odd people who want that street upgraded so that they don't have dust. There's a lot of dust there, and when it rains it's not in a good condition. So they're quite happy to meet with council and to have this as to pay for this to be done to make their area a nice area to live in. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Ripper. Moving on to item A9, invited addresses, presentations or acknowledgements. I think we have a number of those. According to my list, Councillor Crossley.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to pay tribute and acknowledge to a fantastic community and partnership project in the Hayfield, as in the Hayfield wetlands. And it was on the 15th of August that the community gathered, and it was also a gathering of the participating partners of Gippsland Water, Southern Rural Water, West Gippsland Catchment Authority, Wellington Shire, as I say, the community of Hayfield, and particularly all of the supporters and the committee of the Hayfield Wetland Committee. And the very momentous occasion was that they had received an allocation from the state government's environmental flows to put up to 10 megalitres of that diverted Tonsum River water into the western pond that had been newly created in the very substantial wetlands that will revitalise that area, not only as a refuge for migratory birds, plants, but also an addition to that great facility, community facility that's there in Hayfield. Just for those who may not have realised, this has been a project that's been on for about 30 years. It was initially, instigated from the community themselves, what used to be a fairly derelict old racecourse swamp area. And over time, with the support of various agencies and grants, but really mainly out of the dedication of this group of Hayfield Committee to actually create this amazing space. And it's actually, I'll just read some of the things from the chair, which is Barry Donoghue, of the community's commitments that has made this fantastic facility there in Hayfield. And if you haven't been out there, I encourage the general public and whoever else is going there to go and experience it. So that over time, they've had the beauty of Hayfield, they've got a lot of contractors there, but they've galvanised and they have supported this in creating those ponds, which are three ponds now, and they had they moved 7,500 600 cubic metres of soil to actually create the first pond, which was valued about $57,000. So that was a contribution from the contractors there. They've also had great contribution from the Gippsland Glenmaggie Plant Farm, which has donated all the plants. And also then they've had the contribution of the school kids over those many years. And the particular one was the Peninsula Grammar School has come out over the last 10 years, and in that time has planted 12,000 trees and shrubs around that area. So it's transformed what was a blank paddock into an amazing wetlands and swamplands that actually has, I think they did the last count, there were 95 bird species in that area. But also, as I say, it's a considerable important habitat. And it was also amazing that they've got the VCAL students from the Sale Catholic College comes out there. They've been making duck nests, duck boxes, floating islands for aquatic plants, and other improvements around the natural areas. It was actually great to have the primary school out there at the time doing science weeks activities, but that's a regular thing that they do in that area. And so it was an amazing celebration, and that input of that water will really help that area and improve the whole amenity of it. They had to compete because this is a state asset, this environmental flows, but they'll be monitoring the successes of it. They've got particular regular video monitoring and water testing, but this could be a regular thing that occurs and is being considered an important, as I say, refuge, man-made refuge in the state. So I just think that the Hayfield community were visionary in starting this some 30 years ago, and they're all to be highly congratulated. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Crosley. I think we have another one. Councillor McCubbin?
Indeed so. Thank you. I'd like to make a presentation to the Wellington Shire, and specifically to the Mayor, in regard to the Sale RSL, in regard to the generous support of the Wellington Shire to the 2018 centenary of Armistice Ball. I had the very great pleasure to MC that event. It was held in the Memorial Hall, and the Sale RSL and the veteran community came out in their numbers. 100 years ago, the township of Sale was awash with the buzzing of horns and the bells and all sorts of things as the community poured onto the streets to celebrate the end of one of the most vicious wars in our lifetimes and in anyone's lifetime. It was a terrible event. And of course, Gippslanders were present on all of those famous charges. The Battle of the Neck at Gallipoli, made famous in the movie. There was Gippsland Sale people who were part of that charge. The Battle of the Somme at Poitiers, there was basically a Gippsland regiment that was wiped out during those famous battles. And indeed, the charge at Bathsheba, the famous charge there again, Gippsland men and women. And in fact, men and women from the Wellington Shire were involved in all of those. So the idea of the commemoration was to, I guess, celebrate that day that the war to end all wars was over, but also and ultimately to ensure that the men that gave their lives, the men and women who gave their lives in that conflict, would never be forgotten. And I'd like to congratulate the Sale RSL for continuing that tradition of ensuring that they are not forgotten, and indeed thank the Wellington Shire for the funds that were able to make that event occur. So thank you, Mr Mayor. I shall pass that on behalf of the RSL. Good work. Well done. Thank you. Thank you.
Could I, before we move on to, I know Councillor Ripper has something to say, but in regard to this particular matter, Sale RSL made this available on Saturday, on the 53rd, well, in fact, Sunday is the 53rd anniversary of the Battle of Long Tan, and I was privileged to be at the Sale RSL on Saturday for, again, an incredibly engaging and acknowledging service, which included amongst them a member of the Armoured Corps who fought in Vietnam at a battle outside Long Tan. So for me, given my age and as a former national serviceman who didn't go to Vietnam, the whole process was incredibly moving, and for me it just reinforces the value of what our service and community groups provide. My day ended up at Mafra at the Fire Brigade for their annual presentation night, and again to meet with people who are approaching things like 70 years of service to their community, and we are well served in this community by not only volunteering but the sense of community that permeates every small town and our large towns in Wellington generally. So thank you for that, Councillor McCubbin. Now, Councillor Ripper.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to acknowledge, as you can see on the front of the Gippsland Times, the AFLW Women's League, the Bombers, who belong to Briagolong and Boysdale, won the grand final, second time in succession. And there's always a lot to do of a weekend. If you read your Friday's Gippy Times, and you'll find so much to do that you can spend half the weekend reading what to do before you decide. So that was on Sunday, which was a wonderful day, and it was a lovely family day. We came into the Sale Oval, so we came into the Central Ward. We don't mind the Northern Ward. We did that. It was a lovely oval. Everything went well. So congratulations to the girls, and that's the second year that they won. And just to let you know how strong a team they were, 100 points was what was on the scoreboard, but you had to add them together. So 92 points Boysdale Briagolong to 8 points Bunyip. So they did well. So moving on, we're going to go to the circus now to finish off at Stratford Courthouse Theatre on Saturday night. There is a mystery about an elephant coming under the viaduct into Stratford. It's still a mystery. It's still a mystery, but you have to read the book. So a local, Gavin Donoghue, who's in the community, had heard a lot about this book, so he decided to do research. That took him overseas to a lot of places, to a lot of circus, talked to old people who were in the circus years ago. So that was just showed you at the Courthouse Theatre on Saturday night. What a wonderful night. They had a ringmaster, they had clowns, they had lots of magicians, and it really showed what the Wellington Shire can do, and it is an absolute template on how to launch a book. It wasn't just, this is the book, this is blah, 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 cup of tea and go. It was a full night and everyone is talking about it. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ripper. If we could move on to item A11, the Mayor and Councillors' Activity Report. And before I ask for this to be moved, I'd just like to make a couple of brief comments in regard to the activity report for the period that runs from 13th of July to 9th of August. And I note at the very beginning of this report my absence for a little while in the acknowledged activities. And I'm particularly grateful to all of my colleagues because I managed to slip away to Noosa for a week or so for I'd call it a fact-finding trip, but it was really a holiday after an ill-fated holiday sometime earlier, and my wife was now well enough to go to catch a week away. So I'm really grateful for my colleagues for the support and the level of participation they provide, which made that possible for me to, and I'm sure Jill is extremely grateful for that as well.
We didn't think we'd make it without you, Mayor.
Oh, thank you so much. But there are some other really critical and important issues in here that I'd like to just touch on briefly. Among them, Opera Australia's school tour, and Councillor Marr, Councillor Ripper and myself, I don't know, you weren't there, Councillor Stevens, were you? No, just the three of us, according to the report, were there when Opera Australia presented Barbara of Seville for the school children. The wedge filled twice, I think, on that day. It was amazingly engaging. The school kids, you know, I won't do the Figaro for you that they did, but it was really fabulous. And again, it just simply shows the corporate responsibility that perhaps our largest ratepayer does and recognises the value and the contribution they make to our community. There was a couple of other issues that I think were really important during this month, and one of the highlights for me for this role is the citizenship ceremony. And this one in particular, and we hold a number of them through the year, one on obviously Australia Day and then the rest of them in this room. But on that particular day, Councillor Ripper, Councillor Stevens and Councillor Marr were also present, and I think that in fact added to the day. I think our new citizens were delighted with that fact that it was done in such a way, and they were so appreciative. And for me, to see people who've in fact taken the journey to citizenship and what that means to them is particularly meaningful. The last thing I'll mention, well, two things. A meeting that the CEO and I had with Darren Chester in regard to planning for the future as we do and talk about the opportunities that are likely to present themselves, and that was particularly meaningful. And last but not least, another tour of Ash Mill with the member for Eastern Victoria, Jane Garrett, with Councillor Hull and the CEO, and again to reinforcing the importance that this business provides not only to our incredibly resilient Hayfield community, but to Wellington more broadly and the broader Victorian community in terms of the jobs and its opportunities. It's an amazing situation, and it was good to have Jane Garrett along, who I believe is I can't say wedded to it, but she's very supportive of what happens out there, and it's an amazing experience. So I might hand over to you now, Councillor Crosley, if I might.
Thank you, Mayor. I move that the Mayor and Councillor activity report be noted.
Seconded, Councillor Ripper, I think by just that much. That's not opposed. If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Crosley.
Just if I can add a couple of points, and thank you for your summation there. That I just thought I'd bring your attention to there were two openings at the Gippsland Art Gallery, and I think importantly that the significant one, well, two significant ones for me, certainly an avid follower of space and all things out there, and I've collected space paraphernalia and cuttings and things like that for a very early age, so I was very pleased to be able to attend this fantastic exhibition in the gallery celebrating the 50 years of the landing of the moon. So I'd encourage people to see that. But also another significant one is the works of Fred Williams, who is one of Australia's major landscape artists. I personally think he's one of our best landscape artists. And these works are significant because they are the series from his time and studies and major paintings that he did in Gippsland. And it's actually the first time that this collection of works has ever been shown before. So they've been selected in other exhibitions, but never the whole collection of Gippsland works. So we're indebted to Lynn Williams, his widow, and also private collections, and that includes the NGV as well. So it's a major exhibition down there, and I really encourage you to see these works. Many, as I say, some of these works haven't been seen in galleries, and certainly not in this layout, so I certainly encourage it. And if you like a local flavour, there's also Crystal Stubbs, who's done a fantastical exhibition of glassworks that has been inspired by Alice in Wonderland. So, and I encourage you, and really that's a great one for the kids to go and get engaged in as well. So it's a bit tricky for me because all kids height. So, but I really encourage people to go and see those exhibitions. And I suppose the other thing that we had great celebrations through the Shire and certainly in Stratford, because there was announcements of successful funding for the female-friendly upgrades to the Stratford football netball club rooms, and also very exciting news for Pine Lodge with the extra newly renovated tennis courts. So that was a great news. We opened the Willow Park and then we closed it due to the floods. But that was a great thing. Darren Chester came because we were successful in his support for federal funding to upgrade that area. The town, it looks fantastic. The town came out, they really appreciate it, and some people are doing regular walks as well out there on the shared pathway, main pathway. But we will be always grateful at this time for rain. So it's all good. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Crosley. I thought I was the one that does the jokes, but moving on to item B, Report of Delegates. Councillor Marr.
Being a board member to Resource Recovery Gippsland, a councillor must sit on the forum. So I am a forum member. Now, with regard to the forum, it's a channel for local government informs state government agencies on matters of waste and resource recovery, as well as priorities to the shires within Gippsland. Council managers and officers attend forum meetings with the councillors, currently from Latrobe City Council, Bass Coast, Baw, East Gippsland and South Gippsland. Currently from Wellington, we have Tim Rowe, Sam Knock and Raquel Harris, who I certainly commend. We've got a great team that work with the forum, and they're certainly a great asset to Wellington Shire. As part of the communication strategy, Resource Recovery Gippsland has produced their first edition newsletter called The Voice of Resource for local government. And the newsletter basically provides an overview of the issues and discussions of the forum members. And as you can see, it's a lovely lot of people that are sitting there. And I must say that with this meeting that we attended at TAFE Gippsland in Traralgon, it was a really constructive and informative meeting. The newsletter actually details just summaries of what the forum actually discussed. And I must add that Dale Harriman from the Latrobe Council was appointed forum chair for the first time. Dick Ellis had been acting chair and has stood down for Dale Harriman, and it will certainly be an interesting and great period of time with Dale at the chair, because I think that there's a lot in this space that local government has to share with all of the stakeholders. It also does give a brief overview of SKM, that whilst it doesn't directly reflect or affect councils in Gippsland, it certainly will affect us in the recycling space, as I believe it will affect everyone within Victoria as to how we actually consider recycling and what we actually need to do as individuals and as communities. I do encourage that everyone have a look at this and keep updated with what is actually going on to share with your community members. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Marr. Given the formality of that report, it's probably appropriate that we in fact have it moved that report be accepted this time. So, Councillor Rezzetti, are you happy to do that? Councillor Crosley, you're happy to second that? I gather that wasn't opposed, and we will in fact, that's carried. And I understand we have another delegates report, Councillor Hole, is that right?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. On the 9th of August, with our General Manager Sharon Houlihan, our General Manager for Community and Culture, we attended the Emergency Management meeting in Melbourne. It's run quarterly and comprises just about all councils over the state, not just Metro on their own or the country on their own. We actually put an agenda item on this time, and there were several items which I'll deal with in a second, but one that we put on was a letter from Helen Vaughan, who's the Deputy Secretary Water and Catchments Group, and says, I'm writing to thank Wellington Shire for the excellent service provided to supply water to residents following rainwater tank contamination by acid soot from the 2019 bushfires. I understand that Wellington Shire provided 40,000 litres of container drinking water to Dargo residents, and a system to pump water from the Dargo River to meet other domestic needs. I recognise that this pumping system provides a redundancy to Dargo in case. I'm reading it off this machine. In case the town faces a water supply challenge in the future. I commend the services provided by Wellington Shire Council to support the welfare of the community following the 2019 bushfires. And so we were very pleased to share that with all the other members of the Emergency Management Committee from around the state. But some of the things that came out at that meeting, and first off, I must make mention that Andrew Crisp, the new Commissioner for Emergency Management, was the guest speaker. He's only been in the job not quite 12 months, and usually guest speakers get about 30 minutes, and he did over an hour and a quarter, and everybody in the room paid full attention to him. He had a lot of information and was willing to share it with us. And I've run through some of the problems that he sees and that we're going to have to deal with a little bit later on as we go through life. But first off, the fire restrictions will come in September this year again. That's because of the dry conditions throughout the state, not just here. One of the big problems that they're experiencing at the moment is the vulnerable persons register. There's a lot of work to be done in this area because nobody knows whose job it is to run it, operate it, keep it up to date, and the criteria to be registered in that register doesn't fit everybody that needs to be on it. So that's going to the Minister as a recommendation from around the state, from various other regional meetings to be looked at. Confusion reigned around the terminology between neighbourhood safer places and a place of last resort. The greatest concern is in those areas that have one road in and one road out. It has been suggested that the local school be used if necessary. That's not going to be taken up, and so like all good committees, you pass it on to somebody else to solve, and that's going up to the Minister. From meetings around the state with various organisations, including local government, a suggestion to bring into the control centres from people from the regions who've got local knowledge. Last year when we had those bushfires, there were 13,000 changes of manpower, and so people were getting tired because we just didn't have the skills to keep everybody getting tired. From that information, the question was raised, with the dropping numbers now in the CFA, the ability for long-term firefighting. The media report a couple of days before we had this meeting was that in the last couple of years, 1,736 decrease in the CFA membership, and so that's going to be looked at by this commissioner to see what can be done. He's going to talk to the CFA hierarchy and to try and work out some sort of encouragement to get some members back into the group. The issue that created a lot of discussion and strong discussion was it's time to streamline the relief and recovery because this is handled by several different government departments, and so they're not getting a consolidated sense of direction because everybody's pushing their barrow on what they have to handle. So that is also going to the Minister. Excuse me. The other thing was, the major issue raised was the worry that with those involved with emergency management, particularly in local government, because they have to work and they get tired. And so the question has been raised, what can be done to support officials and councils when it comes to big events? And that's going to the Minister. So the Minister's got a load of stuff coming, but he's got the wherewithal and the money, and we'll look forward to our next meeting in November, and we'll see what the results are before the big fire season starts.
Thanks, Councillor Hole. And with Councillor's indulgence, given that we moved and seconded the acceptance of the delegates' report, we might extend that to accepting both delegates' report. Are we happy with that? Done. Excellent. Moving on, item C1, Chief Executive Officer's report. Councillor Rossetti.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. I move that the Chief Executive Officer's report be received.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Bye. Is that motion opposed? Not, the motion is carried. Councillor Rossetti.
Thank you, Mayor. I was actually out on Saturday night with a GP from Melbourne, and he found out that I was on council, and he said, "Why would you want to do that?" And I replied, I said, as well as obviously contributing to the local community, it's about the diversity of what we deal with. It's quite an extraordinarily diverse business. Council, the amount of services we provide to our community is enormous. We spoke about it in terms of his medical practice, where he had 10 or 12 doctors and a number of services they need to provide. But once I started listing out what council provides and what councils provide, it's quite extraordinary. And this list of the CEOs of his activities just shows that breadth of it. As well as going to Broken Hill to go to a Chief Officer's group meeting, he's also talking about water projects, talking about the Ombudsman's 90-mile beach report, and speaking with the Ombudsman, shared services models, trying to find ways of actually being able to deliver services to our communities much more efficiently, so that we can deliver more services for the same price. Talking to Ramiak about the amazing things that they're doing there and seeing how we can support them in things like the work they're doing getting into National Disability Service provision. Talk about access and inclusion issues around our community. The men's shed, the sort of work they're doing in the community. The citizenship ceremonies, which are so important to those people who become new citizens. They don't just want a letter to come in the mail, they actually want to stop and pause and recognise that life's changed for them. The Princess Highway duplication is a huge difference to our community, and we're in there batting for it. The Macalister Irrigation District, so much of our food bowl. The opening of Willow Park, as we've heard from Councillor Crosley. Ashmill, the employment that creates for our community and the timber products it creates. He's even got time to send a birthday card to Councillor Stevens for tomorrow. Central Gippsland Tourism, the Gippsland Small Business Events, the local government professionals meetings. The list goes on and on. It's quite extraordinary. And even things like the Rural Council's Transformation Program, which has got some great stuff going on in there about how we can adapt to the challenges of our climate change in the future. So while we look at these and think that's what the CEO needs to do, absolutely this is the CEO's role, we should all reflect, though, on the fact that we, as a council, are involved in an extraordinarily large number of areas in benefiting our community. And so when I spoke to this doctor on Saturday night, I was extremely proud of the work that the 79 councils and councillors around those tables do to support, often in challenging circumstances, often with limited budgets, often with very many competing interests. But it's one of those things you can stand up and be proud of what you do, and I think what we do here we should be proud of as well. Well done.
Thanks, Councillor Rossetti, and particularly well said. Can we move on to item C, 1.2 July 2019, Council Performance Report. Councillor Stevens.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. I'm happy to move that Council receive and note the July 2019 Council Performance Report as attached.
Second for that motion, Councillor Bye. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Stevens.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor. Actually, Councillor Rossetti stole some of my thunder for a couple of the highlights that I picked out of the July Performance Report, but I might be locked into repeating them. Look, it's interesting just to note a number of things that I support what Councillor Rossetti just said. We have a very diverse range of things that we do in council, but just to pick out a couple of things that I noticed highlights for the month of July. Firstly, we now, of course, have got e-waste processes in place. We have bins here at the Port of Sale and also in the Yarram Hub for small e-waste items. And, of course, I'm not sure about other transfer stations, but we've got a very impressive shed at the Yarram transfer station, which we're now going to slowly fill up with e-waste, which I'm informed we have a contractor to take the e-waste and process it and deal with it. So that's going to be a great benefit to us because that's extra space we're going to have in our tips and less landfill. The The second point I'd like to note is it's very impressive to think that we are dealing with 97% of our regular planning applications within the due time, when the rural average is only 67%. I think the council and the council staff can be very proud of the work they do there, and I get actually positive feedback from members of the public who have dealt with our planning department and planning departments in neighbouring shires about the way that our planning department performs. So more credit to our planners, and I think our manager of development would perhaps pass that on to our planning staff, the good work that's noted what they do. Point number 3, I note that actually at the time this report was written, we hadn't issued the tender for the redevelopment of the Cameron Sporting Complex, but of course at the last meeting we did actually issue that tender, and now I think the people of Maffra, and in fact the whole Shire, can look forward to a major redevelopment of the Cameron Sporting Centre, which is going to be of great benefit to all concerned. I think particularly our gymnasts and also basketballers. And I note that we've also commenced work on upgrading at the Sale Memorial Hall, which is also going to be a great benefit for the community. We had a couple of conversations in July which I attended. The first one at Hayfield. It had been a while since I'd been to Hayfield. I was very impressed with the Hayfield community, the infrastructure they've got in place and the work the community volunteers are doing there. So more credit to your community there, Councillor Hull. It was very impressive to go to both the hall, the museum and the old post office, which of course I note that the community purchased that building for $300,000. Is that right, Councillor Hull? And they actually converted that building with their own local community money into the museum. It's a credit to that community. It was interesting to visit that. Also to go and look at the wetlands. Councillor Crosby just referred to the wetlands. We visited the Gordon Street Reserve, where there's a lot of work being done, very strong committee there. And to me, the tour of the Ash Mill was very impressive. I hadn't been to the Ash Mill, and it's great to see that the Ash Mill is doing such a great job and that jobs are being provided and that they're expanding that mill. I think there was a new shed that they were just about to commission, and they're actually value adding, which I found very important. They're clearly taking great strides to try and maintain their business and to create new products and create new jobs. And also, of course, on the 30th of July, the Remiac Corporation was mentioned, and the plans that they have for development. It was great to go and talk to them about what they're planning to do for the benefit of the community, and also to visit the Sale Men's Shed and talk to our Wellington Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee. And our committee is doing a great job to try and get us involved with people with disabilities and have an understanding of what it means to have a disability. Councillor Hall and I met with a local property owner. He's a resident from Melbourne, but he's got a major sight disability. He took us on a walk around Golden Beach on Friday. Well, by the time he walked us all the way from the Golden Beach General Store to the golf club, I wasn't sure whether Councillor Hall was going to carry me back or vice versa. But the mobility of our constituent was amazing. For a chap with very low visibility, he was negotiating. He's trying to tell us about the needs for additional access at Golden Beach. But I tell you what, he was getting around better than I was. But our Wellington Advisory Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee plays a very important part in our community. And the last thing I was just going to note, I was just going to congratulate Councillor McMillan on his involvement with the very successful Jesus Christ Superstar. I noticed that was mentioned, and the feedback about that was very impressive. It was the best attended amateur performance ever at the Wedge. Is that the information I got? Yes. And I was going to conclude by some smart aleck comment, but seeing as how I don't want to sort of ruin my professionalism, I won't do that. I thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Stevens. Here we move on to item. I don't think I'm the only one doing the jokes tonight. So item C2.1, Assembly of Councillors. Councillor Bye.
Thanks, Mayor. I move the council note and receive the attached Assembly of Councillor records for the period 31st of July 2019 to the 14th of August 2019.
Seconder for that motion, Councillor Marr. That motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Bligh? No. Moving on to item C 3.1, monthly planning decisions for June. Councillor Marr.
I move that Council note the report on recent planning permit trends and planning application determinations between the 1st of June and 30th of June 2019.
Second of that was Councillor Crosley. That motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Marr? Keep moving. Item C 3.2, I think we've still got you in the frame. 90 Mile Beach Subdivision Ombudsman's reports. No, it has. It's Councillor McMillan.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move that the Council receive the Victorian Ombudsman's report investigation into the Wellington Shire Council's handling of the 90 Mile Beach subdivisions dated August of 2019. 2, that they support the Ombudsman's recommendation 1 in principle prior to Council's determination of this recommendation for the next 4 to 8 weeks. Council notes the independent advice has been sought and the mechanisms available to implement this recommendation, including other consequences that need to be considered. 3, support the Ombudsman's recommendations 2 and 3 and commence implementing required actions. And 4, write to the Minister for Planning seeking a formal position on how the State Government proposes to action recommendation 4 of the Ombudsman's report.
Seconded by Councillor Stevens. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor McMillan.
Look, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councillors, for supporting this recommendation. May I begin by thanking the Ombudsman for her work in this report, for going through many, many thousands of pages of documents, of going through the incredibly complexity of this very difficult issue, and to, I think, coming up with a report that we can all be happy with. Certainly the recommendations that Council has acted in an open and transparent and lawful manner and has acted in an appropriate positioning in terms of this is to be congratulated. And to understand that the Ombudsman's report is difficult for Council. I won't lie to you, when we heard that the Ombudsman was giving a report onto the Council, we didn't go around giving high fives and shouting and yelling. The Ombudsman is not a legal process in one sense. It's not an umpire's decision. It is framed absolutely within the objections that people have received. And might I say that I think the Ombudsman's process is absolutely vital to local government. Local government has a degree of power. It needs to act in an appropriate manner. And I think that the Ombudsman, in looking at the objections and the quite legitimate objections to people, they absolutely have a right to object, to look at those and to see whether there's any basis of those objections, whether Council has done the right thing, I think is the right process. It may not be one that we all love, and it's involved an enormous amount of time from our officers to respond to the many queries of this rather complex issue. But it's very important for the people along the 90 Mile Beach that they are confident that Council is acting in their best interests. And I absolutely get what the Ombudsman has done. I absolutely get, and I appreciate the Ombudsman even put it onto a Facebook post, which was unusual and exciting and very, very good, and saying to them that they absolutely were ripped off, that absolutely they were sold a pup, that the Wilmore and Randall process that occurred within the 60s and 70s was an abomination, and if we had proper planning laws like we do today, it would never have happened. And indeed, there was a number of authorities that stood back, and I think that the importance for us is that we don't stand back any longer, that we get involved and we determine an appropriate and proper response moving forward. And I absolutely understand to those people that are caught up in this terrible scheme that there will never be any compensation, never be any words from me or from the Ombudsman that will take back that terrible thing that was done to them by Wilmore and Randall. I completely understand that. But the important thing for local government is, did we do the right thing? And absolutely, strongly and completely, the Ombudsman has said, yes, we did. And I again go back to the Ombudsman's thing is framed within the objectors. The Ombudsman, for example, didn't speak to myself, didn't speak to a number of people who were affected by the decision, didn't speak to the woman that I spoke to in Nusa Dua in Bali about a month and a half ago, who I introduced myself at the shopping centre, and she was an Australian. She said, "Oh, you're from Wellington." "Yeah, my dad, he had a property up on the 90 Mile Beach. I don't know whether you know about that." And Dad had this thing for years and he paid rates on it and he felt terrible and he was able to give the money, you know, there was able to be a buyback scheme in which he was able to get out of it. And I realised from her that her dad had significant issues, but with this scheme that the council had developed, was able to get out from under it. And whilst it never paid him back for the many, many years, he was happy that he was able to be free from this encumbrance of this property that was always to him, I think, a bit of an embarrassment. And absolutely, he was badly affected by it. But the council had a difficult, a Gordian knot it had to untie, and it went through the process. And the Ombudsman's report, which went through those things, absolutely suggested that council's difficult and complex job was done appropriately. There is a number of recommendations which come out of that report, and council has been clear that to the best of its ability it will abide by those recommendations. Some of them are important but minor issues in regard to, you know, we should have put it on the website, we should have communicated the issues better, and I absolutely agree with the Ombudsman and thank her for those learnings which we shall incorporate into our website design. The big one, of course, is the issue in regard to the rates. And council is working through. Understanding, and I'll be clear, we've already received legal advice that we are required under legislation to charge the rates. But we are reviewing that legal advice. We're going back in light of the Ombudsman's report and checking that through. I will say this from a personal statement, however, that rates, the minor rates that we're asking people to do are, well, let's face it, it's a privilege, I believe, to live in the Wellington Shire. It's an absolute privilege. But with that privilege also comes an obligation, and that obligation is the obligation of rates. It is not a fee for service, although I will say on the 90 Mile Beach there is a number of servicing that we are doing. For example, there is fire mitigation that we are doing along the 90 Mile Beach. There is a dedicated officer that is working through the issues that have been brought forward by the 90 Mile Beach subdivision. So we actually are paying for that. Plus the people, of course, have the right to vote. You know, all rights that they have, and there's an obligation that lives with that, I think, that they pay part of the rates. It's part of your obligation, and we understand that it is not just about this group of people that are sitting on the 90 Mile Beach. The issue of the rates that are raised in the Ombudsman's report, we believe, are applicable to other areas of the Shire. So it's setting a precedent that we are nervous about. And I will give this commitment that council is working diligently through in seeing what the implications are of that recommendation, of whether we legally can do what we're doing, whether we are setting ourselves up and moving forward on that. I will also suggest it's always been a statement of the council that this is a voluntary scheme. And interesting that the Ombudsman has now flagged the way and suggested to us that compulsory acquisition should be the direction in which we take. And again, that is a formal position that we're going to be talking to in regard to the state government. And I must say, the adoption of the rates issue in recommendation 1 is absolutely, in my mind, linked to the recommendation 4. I mean, for example, if you are working to compulsorily acquire people's land, it is not appropriate. I don't believe it's moral that we move forward on rates, but we may have a legal position that says otherwise. So what I'm suggesting to people is there's still many difficult issues that the council is working through, and we will be going through them and presenting a formal report to the Wellington Shire within the next 4 to 8 weeks. But please understand that we are operating on very clear legal advice here. We are concerned about setting a precedent. We are absolutely connecting it with the recommendation in the Ombudsman's report in terms of compulsory acquisition, and those issues will be presented at a further council meeting. So for the people wrapped up in this scheme, the Ombudsman's report suggests that this is the best way forward, suggests that council has operated appropriately and properly, that it's tried for the very best of times to create something positive out of something that was so terrible. I agree with the Ombudsman recommendation that they were sold a pup. We have tried all we can to do what we can. But please understand, this council didn't start this process off. It is just we could not stand by any longer and let it continue. We had to do something. And the Ombudsman has said that what we did was right. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McMillan. Does anyone else wish to speak to that? If not, we will move on. Moving on to item C, 4.1, application for unused road licence, etc., etc. Councillor Stevens.
If I can get my microphone working, Mr Mayor, I'm happy to move that pursuant to section 400 of the Land Act 1958, Council give notice that Government Road east of Tranelop 7A, Section A, Parish of Stradbroke, is not required for public traffic and is therefore an unused road.
Second for that motion, Councillor Marr. Is that motion opposed? Not, the motion is carried. Councillor Stevens.
Yeah, just very briefly, Mr Mayor, this is basically a formal process that Council has to go through. I note that the landowner involved in seeking to have this unused road gazetted as a licence to him has actually advertised this process under the Land Act, and in fact there were no submissions. So this really completes the process, and Dwell will be now able to issue the unused road licence to the neighbouring property owner.
Thanks, Councillor Stevens. Moving on to item C, 4.2, road discontinuance and road exchange. Councillor Rossetti.
Thank you, Mayor. I move 1, that Council receive and consider the report from the Submissions Committee in relation to the Technical School Lane Road Exchange, and 2, having regard to the written and oral submissions not opposing the road discontinuance and exchange, but supporting the continued use of the lane, the Submissions Committee finds the road discontinuance and road exchange should proceed as advertised, and 3, the Chief Executive Officer writes to submitters and advise the Council decision, and 4, the information contained in the confidential document item F1.2, road discontinuance and road exchange for Laneway off Macalister Street sale submissions of this Council meeting agenda and designated under section 77 clause 2C of Local Government Act 1989 as confidential by the General Manager Built to Natural Environment on 5th of August 2019 because it relates to the following grounds under section 892 of the Local Government Act 1989. H. Any other matter which the Council or Special Committee considers would prejudice the Council or any person being designated confidential information under section 77 clause 2B of the Local Government Act 1989.
Thanks, Councillor Rossetti. Seconded by Councillor Stevens. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Rossetti.
Thank you, Mayor. We heard references before to being sold a pup. Well, this bit of land was actually a bit of a dog's breakfast, which is not unusual in terms of old road reservations. In this case, what's now named the Technical School Lane has been used for many, many decades as an access nowadays to the back of the shops, but previously all the way through to the old Ford's car park. This bit of lane actually was a bit of ours and a bit of the school education department, and in fact a bit of our road reserve was actually sitting on the tech school playground, now the Sale College playground, and this also includes a small laneway up between Red Cap and the deli, which was all over the shop. And what we've come to an agreement with the Education Department is to neaten it all up, to take back the land that's a road reserve in the middle of the tech school, the Sale College, the old tech school site, and sort out the ownership of the road, which is a public road for our community to use. As we're required to do, we've advertised this to see if people have got any opinions. We had a couple of submitters. We formed a committee to meet up with those submitters. The submitters were not fussed at all about who owned the property, but certainly expressed their view that they wish to continue having access to the back of their properties, and indeed the laneway up between the two shops was getting used. Given it's an easement, we were able to settle that down with the people to let them know that there's no proposal to do anything with those laneways. It's simply the ownership. Given there was no qualm over whether it was Education Department or Council who owned it, they were very happy for us to go ahead. So thank you, Councillors, for supporting this. It'll make absolutely no difference when you're driving up the road. It'll still be the same laneway. The school will still be the same school, but if you look at the maps, it'll kind of make a bit more sense from here on in.
Thanks, Councillor Rossetti. We move on to item C5.1, Gordon Street Recreation Reserve Committee of Management Minutes. Councillor Hull.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. The minutes cover just about the entire gamut.
You'd like to move the recommendation?
Oh, sorry, I moved, don't I? The Council will receive the minutes from the Gordon Street Reserve Recreation Reserve Committee of Management general meeting held on 24th of June 2019.
You were just checking if I was awake. Could I have a second to
I was
that
just checking
motion?
to make sure everybody's awake.
Councillor Crosley. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion's carried. Councillor Hull.
Right, thanks, Mayor. As I was starting to say, or attempting to say, the minutes cover the full gamut of all the organisations who make up the Section 86 Committee of the Gordon Street Reserve. The committee had their annual meeting just recently, and all office bearers except the secretary took on the renewed positions that some of them held for years, and a new secretary has taken on the job, and I'd say she wasn't reluctant to take it on. She was quite delighted to. So one of the issues that are raised in the minutes, as I know you all read them, is the request at our budget session for the $55,000 to buy a new mower for the Reserve Committee, and they were offered $25,000 and with repayable over 5 years at $5,000 from their maintenance grant. Now we've got a section, we've got a volunteer organisation whose maintenance grant comes in around about 30-odd thousand, and they probably put in $300,000 or more of labour because they love what they're doing, and like all community people, are quite generous with their time. We did discuss this at a previous meeting in relation to not only the Gordon Street Reserve and the machinery, but all our sports grounds. And I'd like to think that we might revisit it and have another look at helping these community organisations out. Because to us, a volunteer organisation who's get 30-odd thousand in maintenance money to find $55,000 to put a new mower makes it pretty hard. And I think we should be doing what we can to help these organisations to make life easier.
Thanks, Councillor Hull. Moving on to item C5.2, Briagolong Recreation Reserve Committee of Management Membership. Councillor Ripper.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move that Council appoint the nominated Briagolong Pony Club representative to the vacant committee position as detailed in the attached confidential report to the Briagolong Recreation Reserve Committee of Management for the remainder of the 3-year period ending 18th of December 2021. 2. The information contained in the attached document, item F1.1, Briagolong Recreation Reserve Committee membership of this council meeting agenda and designated under section 77, clause 2C of the Local Government Act 1989 as confidential by the General Manager, Community and Culture on 1 August 2019 because it relates to the following grounds under section 89.2 of the Local Government Act 1989. H. Any other matter which the council or special committee considers will prejudice the council or any person be designated confidential information under section 77, clause 2B of the Local Government Act 1989, except that once this recommendation has been adopted, the name of the successful member can be made public.
Second to that motion was Councillor Hull. Is that motion opposed? If not, the motion is carried. Councillor Ripper, do you wish to speak to that? Could I just add then that the successful representative will be notified in the normal course of business. Moving on to item C5.3, Cameron Sporting Complex Committee of Management Minutes. Councillor Hull.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. The council received the minutes from the Cameron Sporting Complex Committee of Management General Meetings held on the 11th of April and the 1st of July 2019.
Second to that motion is Councillor McMillan. That motion is not opposed. The motion is carried. Councillor Hull.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. This is a committee that's, of course, wildly excited with now that the tender has been let for the new complex. They're working together because there's going to be some challenges to be able to run the various organisations, the gymnastics and the basketball, during the course of the nearly 2 years of reconstruction. and the committee is meeting a little bit more regularly in one way or another. There's 3 different committees that are part of the process, but down the track, I know we're going to meet some obstacles or some snags, but knowing the calibre of that committee and the people in MAPRA, as well as our own officers, we'll overcome them, and we'll look forward in September 2021 to the grand opening.
Thanks, Councillor Hall. No urgent business there.
None,
No further, nothing from the chat room. This is the opportunity for gallery comments. Before I read the preamble, is there anyone who wishes to address council? If not, I won't go through the preamble to that, and note that unless we have any reason to move in